It was late at night, and I was driving alone on a quiet road. The sky was dark, and the only sound I could hear was the hum of my car's engine. The road stretched ahead of me, empty and long, surrounded by trees that seemed to close in as I drove further into the night. I just wanted to get home. My phone was dead, and the GPS in my car had stopped working a few miles back. I figured I'd just keep driving straight until I reached a town or saw some sign of life. But deep down I was starting to feel uneasy. The road seemed endless, and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Suddenly, my car made a strange noise, a loud clunk, followed by a sputter. The engine began to slow down, and before I could react, it completely died. The car rolled to a stop, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I tried turning the key in the ignition, but the engine wouldn't start. It was dead. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence around me felt suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I had no phone, no GPS, and no idea where I was. Panic began to creep in. I decided to get out of the car and see if I could figure out what was wrong. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped outside. The air was cold, and the wind blew through the trees, making them creak. I popped the hood and shone the light on the engine, but I didn't know what I was looking for. Everything looked fine, but the car wouldn't start. As I stood there, I heard a noise, a soft shuffling sound coming from the trees. I froze, my heart racing. I shone the flashlight towards the sound, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness between the trees seemed to swallow the light. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, and tried to focus on the car. But the sound came again, closer this time. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like someone or something was creeping towards me. I gripped the flashlight tighter and took a step back, my eyes scanning the trees. There was nothing there, at least nothing I could see. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just the sound of the wind in the trees and that faint shuffling noise. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel my throat tightening with fear. I didn't want to wait around to find out what was making that noise. I hurried back to the car, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked the doors and tried the ignition again. Still nothing. The car was dead, and I was trapped. I sat there in the dark, listening. The shuffling noise had stopped, but now there was something else. A soft, tapping sound, like fingers drumming on glass. It was coming from the back of the car. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was out there. But my curiosity got the best of me. Slowly, I turned my head and glanced at the rearview mirror. At first, I saw nothing. Just the empty road behind me and the faint outline of trees in the distance. But then, something moved. A shadowy figure stepped out from the trees and stood in the middle of the road, staring at my car. I couldn't make out any details. It was just a dark shape, almost blending in with the night. But I knew it was looking right at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. My breathing became shallow, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. I didn't know what to do. There was no way to escape, no way to call for help. I was trapped in my car with something or someone outside watching me. Then, the tapping started again. It was louder now, coming from the side window. My heart was pounding in my ears as I slowly turned to look. There, pressed against the glass, was a pale hand. The fingers were long and thin, tapping rhythmically on the window. I couldn't see the face of the person or creature that the hand belonged to, but I could feel its presence, looming just outside the car. I gasped and instinctively scooted away from the window, pressing myself against the driver's side door. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, the car began to shake, as if something was pushing against it, trying to get in. I screamed, grabbing the steering wheel as if it would somehow protect me. The car rocked back and forth, and I could hear the sound of nails scraping against the metal. Whatever was out there, it wanted in, and it wasn't going to stop. In a blind panic, I reached for the ignition one last time, praying that the car would start. I turned the key, and miraculously, the engine roared to life. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, speeding down the road. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the thing was still following me. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The road ahead was still dark and empty, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to get as far away from that place as possible. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I saw the faint glow of lights in the distance. A town. Relief washed over me as I sped towards it, my heart finally beginning to slow down. When I reached the town, I pulled into a gas station and parked under the bright lights. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm my nerves. My hands were still shaking, and my mind was racing. What had I just seen? Was it real, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I never found out. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I had escaped, and I wasn't going back. To this day, I avoid that road. Whenever I have to drive at night, I make sure to stick to the highways where there are other cars and plenty of lights. I don't want to take any chances, because out there, somewhere in the darkness, something is still waiting. And I don't want to be the one to find out what it is. I wasn't supposed to take the old highway. Everyone in town warned me to avoid it, especially after dark. They said it was cursed, stories about accidents, strange disappearances, and ghostly sightings were common. But I was running late, and the detour on the main road would add an extra hour to my trip. I figured the old highway would save me some time, and besides, those stories couldn't be real. Right? It was nearly midnight when I turned onto the highway. The road was narrow and cracked, with weeds growing through the pavement. The trees on either side seemed to lean inwards, casting long shadows that made the darkness even deeper. My headlights barely pierced the thick night air, and the silence was unnerving. No cars, no streetlights, nothing but my car and the road ahead. After about 20 minutes of driving, my car started acting strange. The headlights flickered, and the engine made an odd sputtering sound. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to ignore the rising panic in my chest. I just needed to make it a little further, and I'd be back on the main road. But then, without warning, the car jerked violently to the side, and the engine died. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, heart pounding in my chest. I tried to start the car again, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, on a cursed road, in the dead of night. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was just a mechanical issue. I could check the engine and see if I could fix it. I grabbed my phone, but of course, there was no signal. Great. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The air was cold and the silence was oppressive. I opened the hood and shone my flashlight on the engine, but I had no idea what I was looking for. Everything seemed fine, but the car wouldn't start. Frustrated, I slammed the hood shut and looked around. That's when I noticed it. The road ahead wasn't empty anymore. There was a figure standing in the middle of it, about 50 feet away. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching me. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you need help?" No response. The figure remained still, a dark silhouette against the black road. I couldn't make out any details, no face, no clothes, just a shadowy shape. My flashlight barely reached it, the beam flickering as I pointed it towards the figure. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Something was wrong. My instincts screamed at me to get back in the car, to lock the doors and stay inside. But my feet wouldn't move. I just stood there staring at the figure, unable to look away. Then it started to move. Slowly, it began to walk towards me. Its steps were deliberate, almost unnaturally slow. The closer it got, the more I could see. It wasn't just a shadow. It had a face, pale, almost skeletal, with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Its clothes were tattered, hanging off its thin frame like old rags, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, filled with sharp, jagged teeth. I stumbled back, finally snapping out of my paralysis. I turned and ran to the car, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, desperately trying to start the engine. The figure was getting closer, its footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. The engine sputtered but wouldn't start. I tried again, my heart racing. Come on, come on. The figure was right outside the car now. I could hear its ragged breathing, see the fog of its breath on the window. I didn't dare look, but I could feel its presence. It was right there, inches away from me. I could hear it tapping on the glass, soft at first, then more insistent. It wanted me to look at it. It wanted me to see it. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for the car to start, for the nightmare to end. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. Then, there was a horrible scratching sound, like nails on a chalkboard, as it dragged its fingers across the window. Suddenly, the car roared to life. I didn't waste a second. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped off down the road, not daring to look back. The car screeched as it hit the rough patches in the pavement, but I didn't care. I just had to get away. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of the main road ahead. Relief washed over me as I pulled onto the highway, my heart still pounding. I kept driving, not slowing down until I was miles away from that cursed road. When I finally stopped at a gas station, I got out of the car and collapsed against the side, my legs shaking. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. I was safe. I had made it. But then I noticed something. Scratches. Long, deep scratches etched into the side of my car, right where the figure had been. My blood ran cold. I hadn't imagined it. Whatever that thing was, it had been real. I never took the old highway again. I made sure to stay on the main roads, no matter how much longer it took. Because I knew that out there, on that dark, cursed road, something was waiting. And next time, I might not be so lucky.